Welcome everyone to social class in the United States. This is Dr. Moore. A class system is a system in which people are ranked according to both birth and individual achievement. In class systems, people are born into a particular social class, but they may, through individual effort, see some social mobility in their lifetime. Social class in this country can be difficult to define because of the changing economy as well as the many different careers that become available as the economy shifts. An important concept in this unit is social stratification. Exactly what is social stratification? Well, it involves dividing the population into categories of people. And what happens is this creates a social hierarchy, and patterns of social inequality then emerge. What we'll do is we'll try to answer this question. What are the dimensions of this social hierarchy that define and divide categories of our population? The key dimensions of difference in U.S. society are the following, and these are variables that are used in sociological research. Income. Economic inequality is at the heart of social stratification. Income consists of wages or salaries from work and earnings from investments. U.S. society has more income inequality than most other industrial societies. Wealth. While income refers to earnings over some period, usually a year, wealth is total net worth, reflecting all assets minus all debts. It's distributed even less equally than income. Power. There is no direct measurement of power, but power is linked to income and wealth. Power is also unequally distributed. Prestige. This is the symbolic dimension of inequality. In sociology, conventionally, prestige is linked to work. For example, doctors and lawyers are considered to have more prestige than bank tellers and truck drivers. Occupation serves as a key source of social prestige since we commonly evaluate each other according to what we do. Schooling. Education is another dimension of inequality. Schooling affects both occupation and income. More education has been associated with higher income. Finally, something called ascribed traits. Now, these are things including ancestry, race, ethnicity, and gender. Race is closely linked to social position in the United States. Historically, people of English ancestry have enjoyed the most wealth and wielded the most power in the United States. And finally, on average, women have less income, wealth, and occupational prestige than men. It's really against American principles to belong to a class. So naturally, Americans have a really hard time talking about the class system because they really don't want to admit that the class system exists. But the reality is, it does. Sometimes it's based on looks and popularity. Sometimes it's based on money or prestige. Sometimes it's based on how big your house is or where you live. The U.S. is highly stratified. Many underestimate inequality for the following reasons. First, in principle, the law gives equal standing to all. It stresses equal treatment under the law. Secondly, our culture celebrates individual autonomy and achievement. So we tend to blame the individual for his or her social class rather than seeing the power of society. Third, we tend to interact with people like ourselves, so we're not always aware of the lifestyles of those in different classes. And these classes may be social worlds of their own. Finally, the United States is an affluent society. We enjoy many benefits in this country, and when we look outside, we feel very grateful for being here. Let's look at the various social class positions in U.S. society. The upper class Historically, though less so today, the upper class has been composed of white Anglo-Saxon Protestants and represents 5% of the U.S. population. The upper class includes less than 1% of the U.S. population. There's a video included in this week's unit entitled Wealth Inequality in America, which puts this into perspective by showing the actual distribution of wealth in America. The top 1% has 40% of all the nation's wealth. This is the 1% we've been hearing so much about. The lower upper class are the working rich. Earnings rather than inherited wealth are the primary source of their income. The middle class includes 40 to 45% of the U.S. population and has a tremendous influence on our culture. The upper middle class has an above-average income in the range of $116,000 to $205,000 a year. The average middle class typically work in less prestigious white-collar occupations or in highly skilled blue-collar jobs. Household income is between $48,500 and $116,000 a year, which is about the national average. The importance of a college education to middle-class standing is suggested by people placing college decals on their car windows. The working class makes up 1/3 of the population. Their blue-collar jobs yield an income of between $27,000 and $48,500 a year. The lower class makes up 20% of our population. Low income makes their lives unstable and insecure. Poor people often struggle to pay rent and get quality health care. While a small number of families in the United States earn a great deal, the majority of families make ends meet with significantly less. The 1% of families have wealth in the tens of millions and own about 35% of the country's privately held resources. More than 1/3 of the country's richest people got their fortunes from inheritance, not work. And in contrast, the lowest ranking 40% of families have almost no wealth at all. Wealth is important to take into consideration since it often translates into political power. The small percentage of families who control most of the country's wealth also have the ability to shape the political agenda of the nation. This could weaken democracy since the voices of the rich are heard above the majority of the people. Differences in social class also intersect with race and gender to create a more complex picture of a stratified life in the U.S. Social mobility refers to moving to a different class, and it can be upward or downward. Intragenerational social mobility is a change in social position occurring during a person's lifetime. Intergenerational social mobility is upward or downward social mobility of children in relation to their parents. So sociologists take either a short-term or long-term perspective when they think about changes in social position. Massionis stresses that over the long term, changes in social mobility are more due to changes in society rather than changes in individuals. The U.S. economy has an important impact on the level of social mobility. The chapter reviews research on social mobility, and here are 4 general conclusions that we can make about social mobility in America. Social mobility over the course of the last century has been fairly high. The long-term trend in social mobility has been upward. Within a single generation, social mobility is usually small. Social mobility since the 1970s has been uneven, and social mobility varies by income level, race, ethnicity, and gender. Sociologists use 2 terms to describe poverty: relative and absolute. Relative poverty refers to the deprivation of some people in relation to those who have more. Absolute poverty is a deprivation of resources that is life-threatening. The extent of U.S. poverty looks like this. In 2011, the government classified 46 million men, women, and children, 15% of the population, as poor. The poverty line is about 3 times what the government estimates people must spend for food. So possibly this number is a gross underestimate. Although the poor can't be described by a single sentence, and actually a number of ways can be used, poverty affects certain categories of our population more than others. 48% of the poor are young people, less than 24 years old. Two-thirds of all poor people are white. 59% are women. The greatest concentration of poverty is found in central cities. Homelessness is an especially serious issue in the United States because of this country's failure to provide the minimum level of social welfare funding. Nobody knows exactly how many people are homeless in the U.S., largely because it's very difficult to conduct an accurate census of this population. The familiar stereotype of homeless people is being replaced by the new homeless, as they're called. These are people who lost work due to plant closings, women leaving homes to escape domestic violence, and others unable to meet rent or mortgage payments. Two views characterize explanations of poverty. One view is the poor are mostly responsible for their own poverty. The poor can become trapped in a culture of poverty, a lower class subculture that can destroy people's ambition. Why don't the poor improve their lot more often? Likely reasons the poor stay poor are the lack of inexpensive health care benefits, the high cost of child care and housing, the decreasing number of good-paying jobs, and a lack of marketable job skills. Government assistance is often an ineffective bridge to economic empowerment. The Urban Institute prepared a study in 1995 of a hypothetical unemployed Pennsylvania mother of two receiving $4,836 in aid to families with dependent children, AFDC, $2,701 in food stamps, and she was receiving $3,000 in Medicaid benefits. Her total package of cash benefits was $10,527. Working at a full-time job for minimum wage would pay only $9,516 before taxes. She would lose Medicaid, AFDC, and about a third of her food stamps. And she would still need to pay, or at least arrange with a friend or relative, for daycare. Now, while few Americans would argue about the need to reform the current welfare system, a lot of the changes being discussed in Washington and in state capitals around the country assume that many, if not most of the poor, have chosen or deserve their poverty. The second view used in explaining poverty is that society is primarily responsible for poverty. And most of the evidence suggests that society rather than the individual is primarily responsible for poverty. William Julius Wilson of Harvard University points out that while people continue to talk about welfare reform, neither major political party has said anything about the lack of work, especially in central cities. When we weigh the evidence, the reasons that people do not work seem consistent with the blame society position. Then there are the working poor. 4% of full-time workers earn so little that they remain poor. We've been talking about social class differences, which are often based on economic differences. And in conclusion, I just want to mention the Occupy Wall Street movement, which I'm sure you've heard about. The class differences in the U.S. and the increasing wealth gap contributed to the formation of this movement. This movement quickly spread around the country and around the globe. Occupy Wall Street emerged in New York City in September of 2011. The movement is associated with the phrase, "We are the 99%. This brings attention to the concentration of wealth among the top 1% in this country versus what the rest of the country earns. While the movement has many demands, including putting an end to what activists consider the corrupting influence of money on politics, they continue to advocate for an equal distribution of wealth in the U.S. and around the world.